My name is Margaret, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew everything about love, sacrifice, and family. I was wrong. Dead wrong, and I mean that literally. Picture this. You're sitting in your modest kitchen, the same one where you've made thousands of meals, wiped away countless tears, and celebrated every milestone that mattered. The morning light filters through faded curtains, and there it is, a golden envelope gleaming on your scratched wooden table like a promise of something beautiful. Your only son stands beside you, that boyish grin spreading across his 45-year-old face, the same smile that once melted your heart when he brought home finger paintings from kindergarten. His hands are trembling slightly, nervous excitement, you think. How sweet that he's still eager to surprise his old mother. "Open it, Mom," David says, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that has been your anchor for 3 decades of single motherhood. But sometimes, the most beautiful packages contain the deadliest poison. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones sharpening the knife behind their backs. What I discovered on that cruise ship would shatter everything I believed about my only child and nearly cost me my life. Before I tell you how my son's gift nearly became my grave, if you enjoy stories of resilience and survival against impossible odds, please subscribe to hear more tales like this one. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let me take you back to that fateful Tuesday morning when my world crumbled. Inside that golden envelope lay the most beautiful cruise brochure I'd ever seen. Crystal blue waters, pristine white ships, and smiling faces of people my age dancing under tropical stars. David's excitement bubbled over as he explained every detail. 7 days in the Caribbean, first-class accommodations, all meals included. 7 days in paradise, Mom. "You deserve to enjoy life after everything you've given me," he said, his eyes bright with what I mistook for love and gratitude. I felt tears sting my eyes. After years of penny pinching and sacrifice, someone finally wanted to give me something beautiful. My heart swelled with such joy, such overwhelming gratitude for this thoughtful son who remembered his old mother. But that warmth turned to ice when I heard him on the phone an hour later, whispering words that would haunt me forever. "Don't worry, it's a one-way ticket. She won't be coming back." The words hit me like a physical blow. My knees buckled and I grabbed the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. The room spun violently and I couldn't catch my breath. It felt like drowning in my own kitchen, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. A one-way ticket. The phrase echoed in my skull like a death sentence. My son, my baby boy whom I'd raised with every ounce of love in my body, was planning to kill me. The contradiction tore through my chest like broken glass. This was the child I'd rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, the boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, promising I'd always keep him safe. Now he was orchestrating my nightmare. But in that moment of devastating betrayal, something else awakened inside me, something fierce and unbreakable. The same steel that had kept me going through poverty, loss, and decades of struggle. If David thought I was just some fragile old woman, too weak and naive to fight back, he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. He would regret underestimating me. The memories flooded back like a bitter tide, each one now poisoned by the truth I'd just discovered. When David was 12, his father, my beloved James, died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving us with nothing but debt and a mortgage we couldn't afford. I was 37 with no college degree and a son who needed everything from school clothes to college dreams. I became 3 different women to survive. By day, I was Margaret, the waitress at Murphy's Diner, smiling through grease burns and demanding customers who left quarter tips. By night, I'd transformed into Margaret the cleaner, scrubbing office buildings until my hands cracked and bled. Weekends belonged to Margaret the seamstress, hunched over an ancient singer's sewing machine, taking in alterations for wealthy women who wouldn't look me in the eye. The hardest moment came during David's sophomore year of college. He called, voice breaking, saying he couldn't afford his textbooks. I stared at my wedding ring, the only valuable thing I owned, the last piece of James I carried with me. That night, I walked into a pawn shop and handed over the symbol of the greatest love I'd ever known. The pawnbroker offered me $200 for 20 years of marriage. I took it without negotiating. I remember Harold, the kind mechanic who asked me to marry him when David was 16. Harold had gentle hands and a steady income, and he promised to help me with David's college expenses. But David was jealous, sullen, making snide comments about replacing his father, so I chose my son over my second chance at love. Harold moved away 6 months later, and I've wondered ever since what life might have been if I'd chosen differently. But there were beautiful moments too, moments that now felt like lies. David's high school graduation, where he thanked me in his valedictorian speech, calling me his hero. His college graduation, where he walked across that stage with honors I'd paid for with 20-hour workdays. His wedding day, when he whispered that none of it would have been possible without my sacrifices. Even his recent struggles seemed to bring us closer. His bitter divorce last year, the mounting debt he'd confided in me about, the late-night phone calls where he sounded so lost and scared. I'd offered him my life savings, $12,000 I'd scraped together for my own old age. He'd refused, saying he could never take my security away from me. How perfectly, sickeningly noble that sounded now. He didn't want my $12,000, he wanted my $500,000 life insurance policy. The phone calls made sense now, too, the way his voice changed when he asked about my health, my medications, my daily routines, the questions about whether I'd updated my will, whether anyone else knew about my insurance policy. I'd thought he was caring for me. Instead, he was hunting me. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I didn't have but gave anyway, all of it had been for him. I'd shaped my entire existence around loving this child, protecting him, providing for him. I'd given him my youth, my dreams, my chance at happiness, and my financial security. And now, at 72 years old, with arthritis in my hands and a heart that skipped beats when I climbed stairs, I discovered that my only child was planning my murder. The boy I'd loved more than my own life was ready to throw that life away for money. But David had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten who taught him to be strong in the first place. 3 days later, I stood at the port of Miami, watching the massive cruise ship tower above me like a floating city. The Ocean's Dream stretched 12 decks high, gleaming white against the azure sky, with balconies cascading down its sides like steps to the sea. Families streamed past me, children clutching stuffed animals, elderly couples holding hands with wedding rings worn smooth by decades of love. Grandparents chasing toddlers who squealed with delight. The air buzzed with vacation energy. Steel drum music drifted from the ship's deck, mixing with laughter and the excited chatter of travelers beginning their adventure. Young mothers pushed strollers while fathers juggled oversized suitcases. Teenage girls took selfies against the ocean backdrop, their whole lives stretching ahead of them like an unwritten book. I smiled and nodded at fellow passengers, playing the part of the grateful mother enjoying her son's generous gift. Inside, my stomach churned with the knowledge that I was walking toward my own execution. Every step up that gangway felt like walking the plank. My cabin was 247, starboard side, 7th deck. The steward who led me there was a young man named Marcus with kind eyes and a genuine smile. As he opened my door, I noticed how he glanced at his clipboard, then at me, then back at his notes with a slight frown. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Oh, yes, ma'am, just checking something." But his smile seemed forced now, and when he handed me my keycard, his fingers lingered a moment too long, as if memorizing my face. The cabin was beautiful. Too beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a private balcony overlooking endless ocean. The perfect place for an accident. The perfect place for an elderly woman to mysteriously fall overboard during a moment of confusion or dizziness. From the moment I set foot on that ship, I felt eyes watching me. Not the casual glances of fellow passengers making polite contact, but something more deliberate, more predatory. It was the feeling a rabbit must have when it senses the hawk circling overhead. That primitive awareness that you've become prey. David called within an hour of my departure, his voice artificially cheerful. "How's the weather, Mom? Not too rough, I hope?" Strange question for someone supposedly wanting me to enjoy my vacation. "Any big storms in the forecast? I worry about you being so close to all that water." Each conversation felt scripted, rehearsed. He asked about my daily routine with the persistence of someone mapping out a schedule. What time did I eat dinner? Did I like to walk the decks at night? Had I made any friends yet? Did I prefer to stay in my cabin or explore the ship? When I mentioned feeling a bit dizzy from the motion, a casual comment, nothing serious. His voice sharpened with interest. "Dizzy. That's concerning, Mom. Maybe you should stay away from the railings. You know how dangerous that could be." The second day, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I'd packed my return flight information in my purse, but when I checked for it, the papers were gone. I searched every pocket, every compartment. Nothing. Someone had been through my belongings and removed the one piece of evidence that proved I was supposed to come home. I met Carol Henderson at dinner the second night, and I believe now that meeting her saved my life. The ship's dining room was a cavern of crystal and white tablecloths, filled with the chatter of 800 passengers. I'd been seated alone at a small table, watching families share stories and couples toast their anniversaries, feeling utterly isolated in the crowd. Carol appeared beside my table like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known I was praying. She was perhaps 68, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and bright blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd lived through enough to fear very little. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern lilt, "but I couldn't help noticing you're dining alone. Would you mind if I joined you? My husband passed 2 years ago, and I'm still getting used to traveling solo." There was something about her directness, her complete lack of pity or condescension, that drew me in immediately. As she settled into the chair across from me, those sharp blue eyes studied my face with an intensity that made me fidget. "You're carrying something heavy," she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries about the food and the ship's grandeur. I recognized the look. I wore it myself for months after Harold's diagnosis. I tried to deflect, to paste on the brave smile I'd perfected over decades of struggle, but Carol wasn't fooled. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Honey, I've raised 4 children and buried a husband. I've seen fear in more forms than I care to count. Whatever's eating at you, it's more than seasickness or vacation nerves." She looked into my eyes and knew I was carrying a burden no mother should bear. That same evening, I noticed him for the first time, a man in a faded green shirt who seemed to appear wherever I went. He was unremarkable in the way that made him dangerous. Average height, thinning brown hair, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. But I didn't forget, because he was always there. When I walked the promenade deck after dinner, he stood at the rail 50 feet behind me, smoking a cigarette and staring at the ocean. When I stopped at the gift shop to buy postcards I'd never send, he browsed the magazines nearby. When I took the elevator to Deck 9, he got off on the same floor. The cruise director, a woman named Stephanie with an aggressively bright smile and hair like spun gold, seemed to take special interest in my activities. She'd appear with suggestions for shore excursions that would take me away from crowds, quiet spots perfect for reflection and solitude. Her recommendations always seemed to involve isolated locations or activities that would put me near the ship's railings during rough weather. "You seem like someone who appreciates peace and quiet," she said one morning, her smile never wavering. "Have you considered the late-night deck walks? Deck 12 is usually deserted after 10 p.m., perfect for stargazing." Small things began happening that chilled me to the bone. Room service I hadn't ordered, my balcony door unlocked when I was certain I'd secured it, the feeling that someone had been in my cabin while I was at dinner, though nothing seemed missing. The invisible net was tightening around me, and I was running out of time. By the third day, the signs were impossible to ignore. I discovered my cabin keycard had been duplicated when I tried to enter my room and found the electronic lock blinking red, indicating another card had been used just minutes before. My hands shook as I finally gained entry, knowing someone had been inside my private space, touching my belongings, planning my destruction. Carol noticed we were being followed during our shore excursion in Cozumel. We'd decided to explore the local markets together, hoping the crowds would provide some safety. But as we wandered through the vibrant stalls filled with hand-woven textiles and silver jewelry, she grabbed my arm suddenly. "Don't look back," she whispered, "but that man in the green shirt is 20 feet behind us. He's been matching our pace for the last 10 minutes. My blood turned to ice. The same man who'd been haunting my peripheral vision since boarding was now following us onto foreign soil. This wasn't paranoia. This was a coordinated plan. Later that evening, as we returned to the ship, I overheard a conversation that made my knees weak. 2 crew members were talking near the staff quarters, their voices low but not quite low enough. "The old woman in 247, one said. "Tomorrow night during the storm." "Weather reports show rough seas," the other replied. "Perfect conditions for accidents." They scattered when they noticed me, but the damage was done. They were discussing my murder like a weather forecast, clinical and matter-of-fact. David's phone calls became increasingly urgent, his questions more pointed. "Are you enjoying the ocean views, Mom? Do you spend much time on your balcony? How are you sleeping? Any dizzy spells?" Each question felt like he was checking items off a list, confirming details for his hired killer. The most chilling moment came when I answered his call while standing near the ship's library. "Where are you right now?" he asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. "Just reading, dear," I replied carefully. "Good, stay inside today. I heard the weather might get rough." But when I checked the ship's daily bulletin, it promised clear skies and calm seas. David was monitoring weather reports for a different reason entirely. He was waiting for the perfect storm to mask my disappearance. Carol's background proved invaluable in our investigation. Her late husband had been a detective for 30 years, and she'd absorbed more about criminal behavior than most people learn in a lifetime. Together, we began systematically documenting everything. Elman, La Via Visa. I started recording David's phone calls on my ancient flip phone, a skill my granddaughter had taught me for capturing family conversations. His voice took on a different quality when he thought he was being clever, a cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. "Have you made any friends on the ship, Mom?" he asked during one call. "Anyone who might miss you if something happened?" "Just casual acquaintances," I lied, glancing at Carol, who was listening intently. "No one special." "Good. Good that you're not getting too attached. You know how you can be." Carol began her own surveillance, using skills her husband had taught her decades ago. She photographed the man in the green shirt discreetly, noting his patterns and movements. She struck up conversations with crew members, learning that several had received unusual instructions about monitoring elderly passengers for safety concerns. The pieces of David's motive began falling into place through overheard fragments of conversations and careful observation. During a late-night walk, we passed a group of crew members on their break, speaking freely in what they thought was privacy. "Gambling debts," one said, shaking his head. "Heard he owes nearly $1 million to some dangerous people." "Insurance money's the only way out for guys like that," another replied. "Seen it before. They always go after family first." My heart sank as the full picture emerged. David hadn't just accumulated debt. He'd borrowed from loan sharks, the kind of people who break kneecaps first and ask questions later. My life insurance policy wasn't just an opportunity for him. It was his only chance at survival. Carol helped me access the ship's computer center, where we researched David's financial situation using my login information. What we found was devastating. Bankruptcy filings, liens on his house, notices of default. He'd lost everything in poker games and sports betting, spiraling deeper into debt after his divorce. But the most damning evidence came from my own purse. Carol noticed something I'd missed. A small tracking device sewn into the lining, no bigger than a button. Someone wanted to know my exact location at all times. "This is professional grade," Carol whispered, examining the device under a magnifying glass from the gift shop. "This isn't some desperate son acting alone. He's hired someone with experience. We found evidence that someone had been systematically searching my belongings. Items were never quite where I'd left them. Medications moved slightly, jewelry shifted in its case, papers shuffled through with careful precision. Someone was learning my habits, my health conditions, my weaknesses. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. The ship's gift shop clerk mentioned that someone had been asking about me, a man wanting to know if I'd purchased any seasickness medication, if I seemed unsteady on my feet, if I appeared confused or disoriented. The attempts on my life began subtly, disguised as accidents that could happen to any elderly passenger on a moving ship. The first occurred during my evening constitutional around the promenade deck. I'd made it a habit to walk after dinner, both for exercise and to stay visible to other passengers. Safety in numbers, I thought. The deck was unusually empty that night, and I should have trusted my instincts and returned to my cabin. Instead, I continued my circuit, enjoying the ocean breeze and the sound of waves against the hull. I was admiring the sunset when I felt hands against my back. Not a push, exactly, but firm pressure that sent me stumbling toward the railing. I grabbed the metal barrier just in time, my heart hammering as I looked down at the churning water 12 stories below. When I turned around, the deck was empty. Whoever had tried to send me overboard had vanished like smoke. The second attempt was more sophisticated. At the poolside bar, a friendly bartender offered me a complimentary tropical drink, beautifully garnished with fruit and tiny umbrellas. But something in the smell made me pause. A sharp, chemical odor underneath the coconut and pineapple. When I pretended to sip but didn't swallow, the bartender watched me with unusual intensity. Carol appeared beside me at that moment, claiming she'd been looking everywhere for me. In the confusion of greetings and introductions, she somehow managed to switch our drinks. 20 minutes later, she discreetly told me the bartender had asked her twice if I'd finished my cocktail, seeming disappointed when she said I'd barely touched it. The most terrifying incident happened during a violent storm on the 4th night. I woke to find my balcony door wide open, wind and rain blashing into my cabin. But I distinctly remembered not only closing it, but checking the lock twice before bed. When I rushed to secure it, I discovered the safety railing had been loosened. 3 bolts removed, leaving it dangerously unstable. Anyone stepping onto that balcony in the dark would have fallen through the compromised railing straight into the storm-tossed ocean below. Each day brought new evidence that my time was running out. The attempts were escalating, becoming bolder and more desperate. Someone was working to a deadline, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. The ship's manifest, which Carol had cleverly convinced a flirtatious crew member to show her, listed me as traveling alone despite her obvious presence in my life. More disturbing, there was a notation beside my name: special dietary needs, medical supervision required. I'd never requested any special accommodations or mentioned any medical conditions. On the 5th night, as I prepared for bed, I found a small piece of paper that had been slipped under my door. In typed letters it read, "Accidents happen to elderly passengers, especially those who ask too many questions." That's when I realized someone had been inside my cabin while I slept, watching me in my most vulnerable moments. They had been planning my fall, and tomorrow night would be my last chance to turn the tables on my would-be killers. Carol and I knew we couldn't simply hide and hope for the best. Whoever was hunting me had patience, resources, and professional expertise. Our only chance was to turn from prey into predators, to catch them in the act with undeniable evidence. My Herald always said the best defense is a good offense, Carol told me as we huddled in her cabin, planning our strategy. These people think they're dealing with 2 helpless old ladies? Let's show them how wrong they are. Carol's experience as a detective's wife proved invaluable. She understood evidence collection, chain of custody, and how to build a case that would hold up under scrutiny. We spent hours gathering everything we could: photographs of the man in the green shirt, recordings of David's increasingly suspicious phone calls, documentation of the accidents that had befallen me. Using her smartphone, far more sophisticated than my ancient flip phone, Carol photographed the loosened balcony railing, the tracking device in my purse, and the threatening note that had been slipped under my door. She created timestamps for everything, building a timeline that showed clear escalation toward a planned murder. "We need to catch them red-handed," she explained, her blue eyes sharp with determination. "Not just attempting something, but actually in my room with tools, with intent. Otherwise, it's just the word of two elderly women against trained professionals." Our plan was elegantly simple. Carol had befriended a young crew member named Roberto, who'd been charmed by her stories about her grandchildren. Through casual conversation, she'd learned about a utility cabin 2 doors down from mine, currently unused and unlocked due to a broken air conditioning unit. We would position ourselves there with Carol's phone, recording everything. If someone came for me during the night, we'd have video evidence of attempted murder. More importantly, we'd have Roberto standing by to alert security the moment we gave him the signal. "The timing has to be perfect," Carol warned. "If we move too early, they'll abort and try again when we're not ready. Too late and—" She didn't need to finish that sentence. I felt a strange calm settling over me as we finalized our preparations. For 5 days, I'd been a victim, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at shadows. Tonight, I would reclaim my power. Tonight, the hunted would become the hunter. My son had made one crucial mistake in his planning. He'd underestimated the woman who'd raised him to be strong. Approaching ship security required delicate handling. Carol and I knew that if David had managed to hire a professional assassin, there was a chance he'd also compromised someone in the crew. We couldn't trust everyone, but we had to trust someone. Captain Rodriguez was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and an air of absolute competence. Carol had observed him during the captain's dinner, noting how he interacted with passengers. Genuine warmth, careful attention to details, and most importantly, no recognition when he looked at me. If he'd been briefed about the problem passenger in 247, he hit it well. We requested a private meeting, claiming concerns about cabin security. When we sat across from him in his quarters, surrounded by nautical charts and family photographs, I took a deep breath and began our story. "Captain, I believe someone is trying to kill me," I said simply, "and I believe they plan to do it tonight." To his credit, Captain Rodriguez didn't dismiss us as paranoid elderly women. He listened carefully as we presented our evidence, the photographs, recordings, and documented incidents. His expression grew increasingly grave as the full picture emerged. "This is extremely serious," he said finally. "If what you're telling me is true, we have a professional criminal operating on my ship, targeting passengers." However, he also expressed the caution we'd expected. "I need to be careful here. False accusations against crew members or passengers can have serious legal consequences, but I can't ignore credible threats either." We reached a compromise. Captain Rodriguez would station 2 security officers discreetly near my corridor, ready to respond to any disturbance. He would also have the ship's medical officer on standby in case drugs or other substances were involved in the planned attack. "If someone comes for you tonight," he promised, "we'll be ready." The ship's grand ballroom had been transformed into a tropical paradise for the final night gala. Palm fronds and twinkling lights created an enchanted atmosphere, while a live band played everything from big band classics to modern pop songs. Passengers dressed in their finest clothes danced under spinning disco balls, their laughter mixing with the music and the gentle sound of waves against the hull. It was the perfect cover for what we planned to do. With 800 passengers celebrating in the ballroom and various lounges, the residential corridors would be nearly empty. Anyone moving through the hallways would be noticed, but more importantly, anyone planning something sinister would believe they had complete privacy. Carol and I made our appearance at the gala, mingling and dancing just long enough to be seen and remembered. I forced myself to smile and chat with other passengers, playing the role of the grandmother enjoying her vacation one last time. Several people complimented my dress. A navy blue number I'd bought specifically for this cruise, never imagining it might be the last outfit I'd ever wear. "You look lovely tonight, Margaret," said Mrs. Peterson from Ohio, a sweet woman I'd met at the breakfast buffet. Your son was so thoughtful to give you this wonderful trip. If only she knew how thoughtful he'd truly been. At exactly 9:30 p.m., Carol and I slipped away from the celebration. The corridors were eerily quiet compared to the festive atmosphere we'd left behind. Our footsteps echoed softly on the carpeted hallways as we made our way to Deck 7. Roberto was waiting near the utility room, nervous but determined to help. Carol had told him we suspected someone of stealing from passenger cabins, which was close enough to the truth to justify his involvement without terrifying him. "The room is ready," he whispered, unlocking the door to the maintenance cabin. "I'll be in the staff quarters, but I'll have my radio on. Just call if you need anything." Inside the cramped space, surrounded by pipes and electrical panels, Carol set up her phone to record through the partially open door. We had a clear view of my cabin door and the hallway in both directions. Now came the hardest part: waiting in the darkness for someone to come and kill me. We waited in suffocating silence for nearly 2 hours, our eyes straining in the darkness, every small sound amplified by tension and fear. The ship's mechanical hums, the distant music from the gallo, the occasional footsteps of passengers returning to their cabins. Each noise made my heart race, until we could identify its source. At 11:47 p.m., Carol gripped my arm. A figure emerged from the stairwell at the far end of the corridor, moving with the deliberate stealth of someone who didn't belong there. It was the man in the green shirt, but now he wore dark clothing and carried a small bag that clinked softly with metal tools. Through Carol's phone screen, we watched him approach my cabin door. He inserted a keycard, definitely not one issued to a legitimate passenger, and slipped inside like a shadow. The door closed behind him with barely a whisper. "Recording," Carol breathed, her fingers steady despite the gravity of what we were witnessing. For 10 agonizing minutes, we documented his presence in my cabin. Through the thin walls, we could hear soft sounds, furniture being moved, the balcony door sliding open, the scrape of metal on metal as he worked to further compromise the railing he'd already weakened. Then came the moment that made my blood freeze. He emerged onto the balcony carrying tools that gleamed in the moonlight. A small crowbar, what looked like a portable drill, and something that appeared to be a syringe. This wasn't just about making my railing collapse. He was preparing to drug me first, ensuring I'd be unconscious when I accidentally fell to my death. The meticulous preparation was terrifying in its professionalism. This man had clearly done this before. Carol was already texting Roberto and Captain Rodriguez when the assassin's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Even from our hiding spot, we could hear David's voice through the speaker. "Is she asleep? Remember, no struggle. Make it look like she got confused, maybe dizzy, and fell. She's old. People will believe it." "Understood," the man replied, his voice emotionless and cold. "It'll look like a tragic accident. Happens all the time with elderly passengers." That was the moment Captain Rodriguez and 2 security officers burst through my cabin door, finding the assassin red-handed with tools, drugs, and a recorded confession of premeditated murder. The trap had worked perfectly. The man they dragged from my cabin in handcuffs was named Vincent Kowalski, a 52-year-old contract killer with a history of making elderly deaths look accidental. Ship security found a veritable murder kit in his possession. Syringes filled with insulin to simulate diabetic shock, tools to sabotage railings and safety equipment, and most damning of all, detailed notes about my daily routines, medical history, and sleeping patterns. But it was his phone that delivered the killing blow to any remnants of maternal love I still harbored. Text after text from David, each message more chilling than the last. "Make sure she's unconscious first. No defensive wounds. Her insurance pays double for accidental death. Do it tonight. I can't wait any longer." The most devastating message was time-stamped just 3 hours before his arrest. "Once it's done, dump the phone. I'll wire the final payment to the account we discussed. Thanks for making this quick and painless for her." Reading those words felt like dying myself. This wasn't a moment of desperate weakness or a single terrible decision. David had planned my murder with the same care most people put into planning a vacation. He'd researched methods, hired professionals, and coordinated timing. He'd thought of everything except the possibility that his old, fragile mother might fight back. In the ship's medical bay, where they'd taken me to treat my shock, I stared at the ceiling and wrestled with questions that had no good answers. Had I been blind to David's true nature all these years, or had my unconditional love actually created the monster who'd tried to kill me? I remembered every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd chosen his needs over my own happiness, every moment I'd enabled his selfishness by calling it love. Had I taught him that my life had no value except what it could provide for him? Had my endless giving convinced him that I existed solely for his benefit? The guilt was almost as crushing as the betrayal. What kind of mother raises a child capable of murder? What kind of love becomes so toxic that it breeds contempt instead of gratitude? But in those dark hours of self-recrimination, Carol's voice cut through my spiral of blame. "You gave him every opportunity to be a good man," she said firmly. "What he chose to do with those opportunities is on him, not you. Evil isn't something you catch from too much love. It's something you choose despite it." Her words didn't erase the pain, but they began to separate my grief from my guilt. When the Ocean's Dream docked in Miami, FBI agents were waiting. David's arrest made local news. Son hires hitman to kill mother for insurance money. Complete with photos of him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief that his perfect plan had failed. The investigation revealed the full scope of his desperation. David owed $847,000 to various creditors, including $400,000 to a loan shark who'd given him 30 days to pay or face permanent consequences. My life insurance policy wasn't just his solution, it was his only hope of survival. Vincent Kowalski cooperated fully in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing details about how David had found him through underground gambling connections. David had paid him $50,000 up front, with another $50,000 promised after my death. For $100,000, my son had purchased my murder. The legal proceedings were swift and merciless. David was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and solicitation of murder for hire. He received 25 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Vincent received 12 years for attempted murder. I attended David's sentencing, sitting in the front row where he couldn't avoid seeing me. When the judge asked if I had a victim impact statement, I simply said, "He's not my son anymore." If you've been moved by this story of survival and the strength we never know we possess until we're tested, please subscribe for more incredible tales of human resilience. These stories matter, and your support helps ensure they continue to be told. Thank you for listening to mine. I'm 73 now, and I've discovered something remarkable about myself. I'm stronger than I ever imagined. The woman who used to apologize for taking up space in elevators has become someone who books her own cruises, travels alone without fear, and refuses to let anyone else's expectations define her worth. Carol and I remain close friends, bonded by the night we saved my life together. We take trips together now, real vacations, not death sentences disguised as gifts. We've hiked through national parks, toured European capitals, and even returned to the Caribbean, though on a different cruise line. I've learned that age isn't about becoming invisible or irrelevant. It's about accumulating wisdom, strength, and the hard-earned knowledge of what truly matters. I was no longer just a mother, I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd stared death in the face and refused to blink. If my son thought he had written the last chapter of my story, he forgot who the true author of my life was. And this author has many more chapters left to write.